Welcome. Glad to have you with us here on Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
We have a mutual friend that did a post on a social media platform recently that caught Gary's attention and caught my attention a little bit, but not nearly as deeply as yours, to the point where you printed it out and you wanted to dissect it a little bit more deeply. And the theme is on detachment. And I think before we jump into this, and I think we can read, it's a little poem or a little narrative. And before we jump into it, I think we can address the word detachment a little bit up front. You had a much different definition in your head than this little write-up seems to indicate. And I'm just kind of curious, when you just, before all this, when you heard the word detachment, what would be your just go-to definition if you were going to explain it to somebody?
You know, wouldn't it be a better world if we all asked people, well, what do you think that means before we jump in and assume, right? I think detachment is one of those words that if you ask 7 people, you'd get 9 different answers depending on time of day and how many beers they've had. And I think that, that's one of those words. It's, we've talked about wisdom is in the definition of words before. And the fact that the same word means vastly different things to different people. Integrity or politics or capitalism. I had a great conversation. I've got 2 exchange students, one from Spain, one from Northern Ireland, and we had a great conversation over breakfast this morning about capitalism and the different things. And I said, well, for me, it's kind of like the quote from who was the English leader who had lots of good quotes?
Churchill?
Churchill. Churchill has lots of great quotes, but one of them is democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others, right? And I said, to me, capitalism is the worst form of economic strategy, except for all the others. I just haven't seen anything else that works. And so can we play with tweaking capitalism so that it's more equitable, et cetera? Sure. I mean, we can always do that. But this word that we call detachment is one of those words. I think it means vastly different things to different people. I think it can be a trigger word for some. I think it can be a goal for others. I just read it and I thought, why would detachment be a goal? That seems like you're numb, like you're out of it, like you're not even part of things. Why do I want to be detached?
So would that be your just simple definition? Is
a
numbness or a just kind of checking out?
It was
Okay.
Until I practiced curiosity, not judgment.
There you go.
And read this piece of paper. Now I have a totally different opinion. As a matter of fact, it's something that I think I want to kind of aspire to. I guess I don't want to detach so much that I don't feel anything. As we've discussed in earlier podcasts, I've just become aware of my feelings late stage in my life as a type A, person, and it's kind of frustrating because now I understand my feeling. I'm a little bit more self-aware, and it's almost more frustrating. I was blissfully ignorant of what feelings were before, and now I have to deal with them. It's like, am I better off? But I know I am. But this detachment is kind of against that feelings thing that I've been working on. So what does that mean? And maybe I want to kind of be detached according to this definition, but kind of swoop in for some good old emotion and feelings every now and then. Or maybe, maybe life is better if you're detached. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I have a couple visuals that come to mind, and that's just how I process information in the world. So the first visual that I think of is a semi-trailer and a semi-box, whatever, what is that called? The load. And so there is a mechanism that connects the load to the trailer, right? So that the hitch. And I knew of somebody who was working on a special piece of technology that allowed for an instantaneous detachment at the sense of a rollover accident, because apparently a lot of semi-cab drivers are killed when the whole rig rolls. And this coupling was designed in such a way that it, there was a sensitivity to motion, and if it did a certain thing, then it would detach. And so I think about detachment in a safety setting
Mm.
in that regard. But the other visual that comes to mind is about the season of life when you leave your parents' home and you go into your own home with a spouse, the kind of leave and cleave model. And I would say that, you know, the relationship that I have with my parents is a strong one. I have healthy, regular contact with them, but there was a detachment that happened in that transition from child to adult, and especially from single to married,
Mm.
because my connection detached from my parents and became a connection with my husband.
Mm.
And so to me, it was a little bit of a different take on that word, but I certainly have heard the context that is familiar to you, which is you kind of zoned out, you're checked out, you are removing yourself from personal responsibility or personal emotional ties to whatever situation is at hand. And so it sounds like there's a really wide range of subjects that this word could be applied to.
Yeah, and so I think then whenever we're going to use the word or words like this, and I'm starting to think of how many words there are, and are there any words that are so pure that everybody knows what they mean?
Probably
You
very
know,
few. Yeah.
and especially in this day and age, it seems like our definitions of things go really weird, and then there's these trigger words or words that people use intentionally to elicit an emotion or a response. I'm always on the lookout for those. You know, like, wait a minute, let's stay objective here, or let's not go there. And so maybe detachment is a good thing there if you don't get triggered by words that you're intentionally being manipulated by.
Right, right. Well, so this little printout that you have in front of us, and I'll read it to you. This was it's set up kind of like a poem. It says the author is unknown, and it comes out of Mind Journal, or the Mind Journal. So it just simply reads detachment. Detachment is experiencing our feelings without allowing them to control us. We step back and look at things objectively. We let go and accept what we cannot change. We detach from others' choices, knowing that their spiritual work is not ours to do. We choose how we will act rather than just reacting. We step away from harmful cravings. Detachment is a deep breath of peace and patience in response to unexpected anger. We can listen without losing ourselves. With detachment, we see our mistakes honestly, make amends, and start afresh. Detachment allows us to be in the world, but not of it. It frees us to lead our lives with grace. And again, in the spirit of curiosity, not judgment, we can take this almost section by section and dissect it a little bit and consider, is this a true statement of me, or do I want it to be a true statement of me? And the first bold sentence is detachment is experiencing our feelings without allowing them to control us.
And that one really struck me. And the reason I kept reading when I first saw this is because that is something I probably need to work on and aspire to, because it's one thing to experience your feelings, it's quite another to have them control me. And I think the reason why I spent a majority of my life not experiencing feelings or trying to ignore them or deny them is because of the fear that they might control me if I let them or if I felt them. And which is bizarre for me to think about now, but I can remember my brain in those moments thinking, and it made total sense at the time. And so if I knew for a fact that my feelings were not going to control me, I would probably have worked on experiencing them more and earlier.
So if we're to analyze, is this true of me, or do I want this to be true of me? I think I could say I want this to be true of me most of the time. I want to be able to experience a feeling associated with a situation, but not have them get the upper hand.
Mm-hmm.
I think, to your point, the fear is that the deeper you let yourself feel that emotion, it's hard to do it objectively because you tend to get really sucked into whatever that emotion is, whether it be anger or passion or anything on the spectrum, right? It's very easy to get so far gone that it is now leading the charge.
That really brings up a memory that I have that's very vivid. Just a few months ago, I introduced my wife to an old friend, Colt, the mutual friend of Birga's and I's, and we were having breakfast, and the conversation got real deep and thought provoking right away. And at one point, he said, "Yeah, you know, anytime I experience that kind of sadness, or if there's any kind of hatred or anger, then I try to identify that and then go sit with it and really go there." And Andrea just looked at him and said, "Isn't that dangerous?" And he says, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, okay, that's not a conversation that I would have expected, but it had a real effect on me because it's like, you know, this person that I know is pretty grounded and stable, and the fact that when he experiences something like that, he goes away and just goes there. Wow. I mean, that's not something that occurs to me. Usually if something's ugly inside of me or I don't like it, I just try to ignore it and hope it doesn't come back, right?
Yeah. Well, so perhaps that's where the next line comes in. It says we step back and look at things objectively. So whether it's anger, disappointment, hatred, some of the really dark negative emotions, if we can almost, and I don't want to get too new agey with this is not where I'm going, but kind of have an out of body experience where you're looking at yourself experiencing the emotion, to do that from an objective viewpoint and say, okay, I'm feeling a whole range of anger emotions in this space. Why? It's the objectivity and the question, it's the curiosity, right? For you to behave in a curious, objective manner as you're watching yourself behave in a particular way.
And this to me says we step back and look at things objectively. It's almost like, to me, I could almost put in there, we step back and look at things without fear. Because for me, fear is at the root of everything that's not good or doesn't allow me to see things objectively. The old three questions, what am I afraid of losing? What am I trying to hide? What am I trying to prove, and to whom? Those things are all based on fear, right? And so when you say we step back and look at things objectively, the only way for me to do that is to try to remove my fear-based lenses in order to try to look at something objectively. And then, can I ever look at something objectively? Aren't we all subjective by definition to some degree?
Sure. You've got your Gary colored glasses on.
And I think it's pretty hard to take them off.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right.
Right. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, especially if we're aware of what that color is, right? And what that filter does.
Right.
And looking at old ideas and things that we know we were acting on because of our environment or our upbringing or something that happened in our lives, and we know that we figure out that thing is not true. I shouldn't act on this. All women don't do this. All men don't do that. The stereotypes that we sometimes form as a kid, not knowing any better, but trying to figure life out, and then we realize that's wrong, and then we say, okay, that's wrong. That's an old idea. Let's not do that anymore. But then we kind of come back to it. So because that's your Gary glasses, right, or your Birga glasses. So as long as you're aware of those, I think that's the best approach, because I don't think you can get rid of them completely.
Right. Well, and I think that's why I'm such a huge advocate of doing life in community, because everyone is going to have their, self-made glasses.
Yep.
And if I was going to very generically describe you, I would say you've got a very Pollyanna-ish outlook on life.
I totally do.
And I am not on that side of the spectrum. And so I think you and I can balance each other out well.
Yep.
And I strive to have more joyful expectation about the good things that will happen. I want that to be a default. And maybe I learned that from you. And conversely, I'm much more timid and reserved and I don't know, introspective, and maybe there's some element of the way that I operate that causes you to not leap ahead quite so fast or with quite so much spring in your step where you may be leaping over an edge somewhere.
No, in fact, it's not just that we value the differences, we celebrate them, and we realize that the perfect yin yang, the perfect team, is people who see things vastly differently, but are for each other.
Right.
Right? That's the perfect team. And that's the way, so recognizing that we're all different, that we each have our own pair of glasses, and then practicing the curiosity, not judgment, and asking questions. Wow, how did you get that from this situation? I read it completely this way.
Yeah.
That's where the true learning and communication takes place.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next section reads, we let go and accept what we cannot change. We detach from others' choices, knowing that their spiritual work is not ours to do. And so as we go back to that...
This is really bad because that means I can't fix people.
Well, yeah, to some degree, you can't. You can offer your suggestions, but then you can't really do anything about it if they choose not to heed your advice.
That's right.
Right? I think that's where we're going.
And I'm saying that sarcastically because how often do I try to fix people, including other drivers on the road, right? And be their driver instructor. And that's what my wife will say to me, you're not their driver instructor. It's like, okay, thank you. But that's the whole point. If we can, acceptance is a big word. That's another word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But, you know, the way I need to do more acceptance is to really not stress about things that I can't change and just accept them and say, okay, that's the way it's going to be. Now what? What's going to be my reaction? I can choose to be happy about this or angry about this, or I can choose, it doesn't have to be dichotomy. I can choose to say, I don't like that situation, so I'm going to do this, right? And it can be avoid the situation. It can be deal with the situation in another way. It can be, you know, a myriad of choices once we allow ourselves to realize that we accept we can't change that. And we can't change others' choices. Other people are going to behave the way they are. Everybody's on their own little journey, their own big journey, I should say, not to belittle it. And we need to support folks by and large in their journey unless they're going to a bad place. And even that is not always ours to judge. I'll never forget the story of someone who said that there was a woman who was widowed, and they were just, you know, they added it to their prayer list that person finds a husband right away. And, you know, then it occurred to them one day that, you know, maybe that's not what's supposed to happen. Maybe the best thing for this person is to evaluate, you know, their own life for a while before jumping into another relationship. Who knows? But this is where the judgment comes in versus the asking the questions of, so how you doing?
Yeah. I have what seems to be a silly example, but really causes some conflict sometimes, is with people's tastes. And so one particular story I can think of is my mother-in-law is not a fan of sweet and savory. She does not like that mix. And it's my husband and I, it's our all-time favorite.
Yeah.
You know, a nice roast with some sort of a fruit compote or, you know, some sort of a savory thing that has the craisins in it or some little sweet element. And we love that combination. And she can't stand it. And my husband continues to try to make things to get her to try them. And I tell him every time, I was like, you can't change her likes. Right. She's 80 plus years old. It's not going to happen. Right. Stop trying to push your likes on her. But it's as silly as that is, it does become a frustration sometimes. And if it's between spouses, you know, when there's dietary differences or when there's differences in shows or pastimes, you know, many different things that could cause that element of conflict. For us to really be able to say that as a statement of truth that, okay, I'm going to let go and I'm going to accept what I cannot change. Your choice is your choice. You're missing out. You're missing out on this yummy thing or this fun thing or, you know, whatever you believe it to be. But I can't make that choice for you.
Right.
And to not assume that your way of doing, liking, being is superior to theirs.
Sure. It sounds like it's almost like a joking thing now between your husband and his mother-in-law. But I think what's funny about that is, and so what's our choice in that situation? We can still make the roast, we can still put the jelly, and we can put it on everybody's except for put hers on the side and say, hey, I got it there for you. You want to try it? But I know you won't. It's okay, right? And just kind of even have a fun thing about it. But, and people's choices change over time.
Sure.
And, while I like predictability in people on most things, it's fun when someone all of a sudden makes a different choice. My daughter-in-law was with me for many, many years on, we don't like pickles, right? So order the sandwich without pickles. Don't, hey, anybody want my pickle? Used to be the big joke at our dinner table. And, there were some of the kids and others that liked the pickles and some that didn't. Well, I guess all of a sudden she tasted a pickle and liked it, and now she likes pickles. And I'm like, you traitor. Right? I mean, come on, you were with me on this for so long, and now we're going to order pickles. But anyway, it's funny that sometimes people's tastes change. We get that thing in our brain that when we say someone's in a rut, is actually a rut. It's one of those synapses that just keeps going more and more and more. That's the part of a judgment that we can sometimes say, look, maybe we should reevaluate that because it might be the easy thing to do, but it might not be serving you.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe there's another way to do this. And so sometimes we can make different choices. I think it's fun.
Yeah. So the next line reads, we choose how we will act rather than just reacting. We step away from harmful cravings, which could be pickles.
Yes, exactly. Cravings, right? Well, and again, as we talked about before, and I think we've addressed this in previous podcasts, harmful cravings, it's like anger. It's okay to feel anger for a moment, but then step away.
Yeah, what do you do with it?
It's the whole, pain. Okay, so pain exists for a reason. You put your hand on a hot stove, then you can take it away. Don't leave it there, right? Don't wallow in it. And I think that's the whole point about step away. Even the step away, as I read this now, occurs to me, means you've experienced it, step away. And I think that's the key to it. It's okay to have certain feelings or even feel anger or hatred or whatever, step away from it as soon as it happens. And then we choose how we'll act rather than just reacting is that goes back to respond versus react, which is the thing that separates us from the animals. Animals just react. We have that pause in between called freedom of choice, and we can choose to do differently, same exact impetus or whatever you call that, the same exact stimulus, we can have a different response and choose differently if it serves us better, especially if it's based on our values.
Yeah. So I'll just read the last paragraph. We're running tight on time, but we'll address it with maybe a few closing remarks. And I'll include this entire little poem in the show notes so that you can go back and read it and dissect it on your own. So detachment is a deep breath of peace and patience in response to unexpected anger. We can listen without losing ourselves. With detachment, we see our mistakes honestly, make amends, and start afresh. Detachment allows us to be in the world, but not of it. It frees us to lead our lives with grace. So give me some closing thoughts on that.
Again, by this definition in this piece of paper, which I'm sure is not the only definition, this appeals to me. With detachment, we see our mistakes honestly. In other words, I'm not afraid of making a mistake, acknowledging a mistake and apologizing for it, right? And I think that's a big deal. That's something I need to really, really think about.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I was going to say, I might almost argue that if you don't detach from your mistakes, it's near impossible to make amends and to start again.
I think you're right. Because otherwise you're wallowing in it.
Right.
It's almost like that step away thing and look objectively. And then we can listen without losing ourselves. My goodness, I am such a people pleaser sometimes and such a chameleon that I'll just kind of jump into a conversation with someone and I'll find myself agreeing and sympathizing, not empathizing, but showing agreement to the point where I'll say yes to something and then afterwards think, well, why did I say yes to that? You know, I don't have time for this. I don't really agree with it. But I'm trying to be encouraging when that word, another word that has many different meanings, I may be better suited to not do that. So listening without losing ourselves is something I think we find attractive in others too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, so I'm very curious to know your response to this. Agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle. Again, I'll put this entire narrative in the show notes so that you can read it and think through it. Always love to hear your feedback. You're welcome to contact us just in the comments in whatever platform you're viewing or listening to this in. Or, of course, you can just zip us a quick line over at curiositynotjudgment.com. There's a contact us section right there on the webpage. So we will leave it to you to be curious about detachment in your life and in the lives of others. And until next time, we'll wish you a very great week.
Take care.